The transmission came in while I was reviewing fuel consumption logs. Not exactly the most exciting way to start a morning, but that is how most things in deep space begin, quietly without drama, until they're not quiet at all. I am Commander Yaravas. I have commanded the UES Ironclad for 4 years, and in that time, I have learned that the universe does not announce trouble. It simply delivers it, and then waits to see what you do next. The signal came from a Velaki patrol fleet. 6 ships in a loose arc formation, sitting directly across the Veyrath corridor like they owned it, which they did not. The Veyrath corridor is a contested shipping lane under galactic compact jurisdiction, which means it belongs to everyone and no one, and the rules for passing through it are very clear and very public. We had followed every single one of them. Lieutenant Owen Hale was the one who handed me the translated transmission. He is my communications officer, and he has a face that does not show much. But when he set that tablet on my console, I could see something in the way he held his jaw. Tight, controlled. He had already read it. I picked up the tablet and read it myself. It was from Admiral Dreth of the Velaki 1st Patrol Division. The language was formal and cold, the kind of formal that people use when they want to sound like authority without having to earn it. The message stated that the UES Ironclad was in violation of Galactic Compact Engineering Standard 7 Theta, which governed vessel mass, power output, and structural configuration for civilian and military transit vessels operating in shared corridors. According to Admiral Dreth, our ship exceeded acceptable parameters in no fewer than 11 separate categories. The message then demanded that we reduce speed to 1/4, cease all non-essential power use, and prepare for immediate boarding and inspection. I read it twice. Then I set the tablet down. Owen was watching me. So was Ensign Carla Denon at the navigation console and Chief Petty Officer Gordon Searle at the engineering station behind me. The bridge was quiet the way it gets when people are waiting for you to react, so they know how to feel. I did not react. I picked up my coffee, which had gone cold, and I drank it anyway. The Velaki fleet had positioned itself well. I will give them credit for that. They had used the corridor's natural narrowing near the Veyrath gas cloud to create a choke point, and they had done it early enough that we had limited options for routing around them without adding 9 hours to our transit time. It was a professional move. It was also completely illegal under compact navigation law, but that was a problem for later. What interested me more at that moment was the specific complaint: Engineering Standard 7 Theta. I knew that standard. I had read it during my 2nd year at the Fleet Academy because our instructor had used it as an example of a regulation that was written for a different time and never updated to account for human vessels. The standard was written 80 years ago by a committee dominated by Velaki and Surith engineers, and it assumed that any vessel above a certain mass-to-power ratio was either a warship or an accident waiting to happen. Our people had argued at the time that the standard did not apply to us. The compact had said it did. We had filed the appropriate objections, submitted the appropriate documentation, and the matter had been sitting in a compact review queue for 11 years without resolution. In the meantime, we kept building ships the way we always had. I leaned back in my chair and looked at the main viewport. The Velaki formation was far enough away that their ships looked like bright points of light, just slightly too steady to be stars. They were waiting for a response. "Owen," I said. "Commander, log the transmission. Full timestamp, sender identification, exact wording. Then pull up compact navigation code, section 14, paragraphs 3 through 9, and cross-reference it against our current heading and speed. I want a complete record showing that we have been in full compliance with corridor transit regulations since we entered the Veyrath approach zone." "Already started," he said. That was why I liked Owen. I stood up and walked to the viewport. Gordon came up beside me a moment later, the way he always did when something was happening, and he wanted to be close enough to hear whatever I said next. Gordon had been with me since my 2nd command. He was a large, quiet man who had once told me that he chose engineering over command because he preferred problems that could be solved with the right tools rather than the right words. He had since learned that they were usually the same problem. "They're going to board us," he said quietly. It was not a question. "They're going to try," I said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The port's secondary coolant system is running a maintenance cycle. If someone came aboard right now and looked at the power distribution grid, they would see 3 backup reactors in standby mode. I know. They will ask about that. I know. And the hull layering on decks 4 through 9 is 3 times the compact standard for a vessel of this class. Gordon, yes, Commander. Why do we have 3 backup reactors? He thought about it the way he always did, taking the question seriously even when he knew I already knew the answer. Because 12 years ago, the UES Steadfast lost primary and secondary power in the Kareth system and went dark for 6 days before anyone found them. 9 people did not survive the wait. And why do we have 3-layer hull plating on decks 4 through 9? Because that is where the crew quarters are. I nodded and looked out at those bright, steady points of light. We built this ship the way we build all our ships, I said. We build it to last. We built it so that if something goes wrong out here, people come home. We did not build it to impress anyone, and we did not build it to threaten anyone. We built it because we learned what happens when you do not. Gordon was quiet again. Then he said, "They're not going to understand that." No, I agreed. They are not. Not yet. I went back to my chair and sat down. Owen had finished the initial log entry and was looking at me across the bridge. "Do we respond?" he asked. "Not yet," I said. "Log our position, heading, and speed every 5 minutes from this point forward. Automatic entry. No manual input required. I want an unbroken chain of data showing exactly what we were doing and when." Carla turned from a navigation console. She was young, 2 years out of the academy, with a careful way of moving that reminded me of someone doing math in their head at all times. "Commander, at our current speed, we will reach the Valaki formation in approximately 42 minutes. "I know," I said. "Are we altering course?" I looked at her. "Are we in violation of any compact regulation?" "Ensign." She checked her console, even though she already knew the answer. "No, Commander. We are in full compliance on all parameters." "Then we hold course," I said. The next 30 minutes were the kind of quiet that has weight to it. The crew worked. Owen kept logging. Gordon ran a quiet systems check at his station. Carla tracked our approach to the formation with the focused, steady attention of someone who took navigation personally. I read the Valaki transmission 3 more times. Not because I was worried about it, but because I wanted to understand exactly what Admiral Dreth thought he was doing. The complaint about engineering standard 7 Theta was not new. The Valaki had raised it before in compact hearings and in diplomatic back channels, but they had never used it as the basis for a physical intercept before. That was new. That meant someone had made a decision that this time they were going to force the issue. I wondered what they expected to find when they boarded us. I wondered if they thought they would find something that confirmed their fears. The human ships were not over-engineered out of stubbornness or experience, but out of aggression. That all those extra layers and backup systems were not safety measures, but preparation for something else. They were wrong, of course. But being wrong and understanding why you are wrong are very different things. And understanding usually requires a demonstration. With about 12 minutes left before our approach brought us to communication range for a standard voice channel, Admiral Dreth sent a second transmission. This one was shorter. It said simply that the UES Ironclad had failed to respond to a direct compact patrol order, that this constituted a secondary violation, and that the Valaki fleet was now authorized to use positioning measures to enforce compliance. I read it. Then I handed the tablet back to Owen. "Log it," I said. "Exactimistamp." "Done," he said. "And pull up the compact definition of positioning measures under Patrol Enforcement Code. I want to know exactly what they are legally permitted to do." He pulled it up. He read it. Something shifted in his expression. Not alarm, but the particular look of someone who has just confirmed something they suspected. "Commander, under Patrol Enforcement Code, positioning measures are defined as non-contact advisory maneuvers. They are not permitted to physically obstruct a transit vessel's path." "Good," I said. "Log that definition as well. Attach it to the transmission record." Gordon made a quiet sound from his station that might have been a laugh, but was too controlled to be certain. I looked out at the formation again. Those bright points of light were larger now, distinct shapes, visible without magnification. 6 Valaki cruisers, each one sleek and fast, and built for a kind of combat that assumed your enemy would run or break or give in. They had no template for an enemy that simply kept going. I picked up the ship-wide intercom and pressed the key. "All crew, this is Commander Voss. We are approaching a Valaki patrol formation that has issued a stop order. We are in full compliance with all compact regulations, and we are continuing on our assigned heading. Remain at your stations, continue normal operations, and please make sure all activity logs are current. That is all. I set the intercom down. Carla was watching the formation on her display. They are not moving, she said. I know, I said. We are 11 minutes out. I know. She turned back to her console and kept watching. The ironclad moved forward at steady speed, its 3 active reactors running smooth and clean, its hull sitting heavy and certain in the dark between the stars, carrying its crew toward a line that someone else had drawn and we had not agreed to stop at. The Valaki fleet sat and waited and did not understand yet what was coming toward them. Not a weapon, not a challenge, just a ship built by people who had learned, the hardest way possible, that if you want to bring everyone home, you build for the worst day you can imagine, and then you build a little beyond that. We had been warned once, a long time ago, that space would take everything from us if we let it. We had listened. The Valaki had not been there for that lesson. They were about to receive a different one. I finished my cold coffee and waited. The first thing Admiral Dreth did when we came within visual range was send a live transmission. Not a text message this time, not a formal written notice, but a live feed showing his bridge, showing the very deliberate way he had arranged himself in his command chair to project authority. He was a tall Valaki with a gray-gold coloring that indicated senior rank among his species, and he held himself the way people do when they have decided that looking calm is more important than being calm. He spoke in compact standard, which every vessel in the corridor was required to understand. His voice was level and precise. He said that the UES ironclad had now committed 2 violations, that the Valaki 1st Patrol Division was acting under full compact authority, and that he was giving us one final opportunity to reduce speed, cease non-essential power operations, and accept boarding before he was forced to escalate. He said the word escalate carefully, with just enough weight to make clear that he thought it would mean something to us. I listened to the entire transmission without moving. Then I looked at Owen. Record this feed. Full visual and audio, ship's timestamp overlaid. Recording, Owen said. I looked back at the main display. The Valaki formation was close enough now that I could see their hull configurations clearly. 6 cruisers as I had counted. They were arranged in a pattern I recognized from compact tactical manuals as a soft containment spread, designed to box in a vessel without quite closing the box, leaving just enough room that the target feels the pressure without triggering an automatic self-defense response. It was a psychologically careful formation. It was designed for species that responded to implied threat the way most species do, by slowing down, by becoming uncertain, by deciding that forward was no longer clearly the right direction. I looked at it and felt nothing except a mild professional interest. Carla, I said, Commander, calculate our transit path through the formation at current speed. Assume they hold position. She was quiet for a moment, fingers moving across her console. There's a gap between the 2nd and 3rd cruisers on the port side, 1,100 meters. We clear it with 400 meters to spare on each side. And if they close that gap, then the nearest alternative path is between the 3rd and 4th cruisers, 700 meters. We clear it with 150 meters on the right and 260 on the left. And if they close all the gaps. She hesitated. Then they are in physical obstruction of a transit vessel, which is a compact enforcement code violation. Log that calculation, I said. Attach it to the record. Gordon had come up beside me again, quietly, the way he did. The hull on the port forward quarter, he said. That is the section we upgraded after the Kareth incident. I looked at him. He kept his voice low enough that it would not carry to the whole bridge. I'm just noting that if the 2nd and 3rd cruisers were to close that gap and we were to maintain course, the ironclad would make contact with both of them before we would. Are you suggesting we would win that contact? He thought about it with the same care he gave every engineer in question. I am suggesting that our port forward hull is rated for sustained pressure at a level that neither of those cruisers is built to generate. They are fast ships. They are not heavy ships. I nodded slowly. How many of our crew know that? Most of the engineering team. Some of the senior deck crew. Probably not the Valaki. Good, I said. I did not say it unkindly. I said it the way you say it when information is exactly where it needs to be. I pressed the transmit key and opened a channel to the Velaki fleet. For the first time since this whole situation had started, I chose to speak. I did not raise my voice. I did not use formal language. I spoke the way I speak to everyone, clearly and without ornamentation, because I have found that clarity is almost always better than performance. Admiral Dreth, this is Commander Yara Voss of a UES Ironclad. I have received both of your transmissions, and they have been logged in full with timestamps. I want to provide you with some information that I think will be useful before we proceed. I paused for just a moment, not for effect, but because I wanted him to be listening. The Ironclad is operating in full compliance with all applicable compact transit regulations. Our heading, speed, and power configuration all fall within the legal parameters for corridor transit. The complaint regarding Engineering Standard 7 Theta is a matter currently under compact review and does not constitute grounds for a stop order under active transit conditions. I have the relevant statutes logged and available for transmission if you would like copies. Another brief pause. I also want to give you some information about this ship as a courtesy. The Ironclad's forward hull plating is rated at a pressure tolerance that exceeds most Velaki cruiser hull specifications. This is not a threat. It is a fact that I think is relevant if your fleet is considering a positioning maneuver that involves physical contact with our vessel. The plating exists because we lost people before we built it that way, and we decided we would not lose people that way again. I kept my voice completely level. No heat in it. No challenge. I am asking you, as a courtesy, to clear the corridor. We are going to continue on our heading. If your fleet maintains current positions, I will document the obstruction and file a formal complaint with the Compact Arbitration Bureau in real time as it occurs. I have no interest in making this situation larger than it needs to be. I would appreciate the same consideration in return. I clicked off the transmission. The bridge was very quiet. Owen was looking at me with the expression he gets when something has impressed him, but he is too professional to show it directly. Carla had turned slightly from her console, watching the Velaki formation on her display. Gord had returned to his station and was running something on his secondary screen, quiet and focused. For almost 3 full minutes, nothing happened. Then one of the Velaki cruisers, the second ship in the port side arc, began to move. Not away from us. It moved to close the gap. It positioned itself to seal the 1,100-meter opening that Carla had identified. "They're closing the gap," Carla said. "Log it," I said. Timestamp and visual. Logged. What is the next available path? The gap between cruisers 3 and 4. 700 meters. Still adequate, I said. We continued forward. The Velaki cruiser held its new position. I could imagine Admiral Dreth on his bridge, waiting to see what we would do, expecting us to slow, to angle away, to show some sign that the formation was having its intended effect. We held course. Owen spoke quietly. "Incoming transmission from the Admiral. Is it logged?" "Yes." "Play it." Dreth's voice came through. The careful levelness was still there, but something underneath it had changed, a frequency I could not quite name but recognize from experience. It was the sound of someone who has pushed and found that the thing they pushed did not move, and who has not yet decided what that means. He said that the Ironclad's forward progress constituted a hostile approach to compact patrol vessels. He said that his fleet was within rights to interpret our continued movement as a threatening act. He said that if we did not stop within the next 4 minutes, he would be filing his own report with the Compact Arbitration Bureau, characterizing our behavior as an act of corridor aggression. I let him finish. Then I said to Owen, "File our complaint with the Bureau now." Simultaneous with his. "I want our timestamps earlier." "Filing," Owen said. I opened my channel again. "Admiral, your fleet moved to close an open transit path after I gave a courtesy warning that we would be maintaining course. That movement has been logged with visual confirmation and transmitted to the Compact Arbitration Bureau. We are now 2 minutes from your formation's current position. I want to be clear one final time. We are not stopping. We are not altering course. If your vessels are in our path, the Ironclad will come into contact with them. I recommend you clear the corridor. Not because I am asking, but because I have just told you what our hull is rated for, and I assume your crews would prefer not to experience the difference." I clicked off. Carla was counting down our approach distance quietly at her console, the way she does when she is focused, not out loud, just under her breath, number she was tracking for herself. I watched the formation. 1 minute out, the third and fourth cruisers began to separate slightly, widening the gap between them. It was not dramatic. It was not a retreat, but it was a movement, and I knew exactly what it meant. Someone in that formation had done the math. 30 seconds out, the second cruiser, the one that had moved to close the first gap, began to pull back as well. Slowly. Not enough to look like a withdrawal, but enough. We passed through the formation at standard speed, the ironclad's hull sliding through the corridor of Valaki ships with 400 meters of clearance on each side, just as Carla had calculated. Not aggressive, not triumphant, just present. I watched the rear display as the Valaki cruisers grew smaller behind us. Gordon spoke from his station. Sensors are showing elevated power readings on 3 of their vessels. They ran some kind of scan on us as we passed. Did we receive any formal scan request notification? No. Log the unauthorized scan. Include the power signature data and timestamps. Already done, Gordon said. Owen was watching something on his console. Commander, I'm picking up a relay transmission from the Valaki fleet. They are sending a data burst to someone outside the corridor. Military encryption. Can we read it? No, but I can log the transmission event, the frequency, the direction, and the approximate signal strength. Do that. He nodded. I watched the Valaki formation recede on the rear display. Those 6 ships sitting in the dark behind us like a question that had not gotten the answer it expected. I thought about Admiral Dreth in his command chair, looking at his sensor data, trying to make sense of what had just happened. He had issued orders. He had moved his ships. He had made his threat, and then tried to enforce it with presence and position. We had said, please move, explained why, and then continued forward. The entire exchange had lasted less than 90 minutes. We had not powered a single weapon. We had not raised our shields. The Ironclad's crew had performed routine operations throughout, and if you looked at our activity logs during the intercept, you would see duty rosters being completed, maintenance cycles being run, and in the mess hall on Deck 6, evidence that someone had made a fresh pot of coffee at the exact moment the second Valaki cruiser was repositioning around us. I did not think Dreth would understand that. Not yet. But the data burst he had just sent out told me that he was talking to someone who was going to ask him to explain what had just happened, and that explanation was going to require him to describe a human vessel that had declined to stop, explain its own hull specifications as a courtesy warning, filed a legal complaint in real time, and then pass through a patrol formation without raising its heart rate. That explanation was going to travel somewhere. And somewhere, someone was going to read it and start asking questions. I turned from the rear display and looked forward. The Veyrath corridor stretched ahead, clear and open, lit by the distant gleam of the gas cloud that gave it its name. Another 4 hours to the far end, then a short transit burn to our destination. Owen, I said, Commander, draft a summary report of the incident. Everything. Transmissions, logs, scan records, the unauthorized data burst, our complaint to the Arbitration Bureau. Full package. Encrypt it and hold it for transmission on my authorization. To whom? I thought for a moment. Fleet Command. And send a copy to the Compact Bureau of Transit Affairs. And send another copy to the Independent Shipping Consortium we passed in Sector 9 on the way in. They have been pushing for corridor rights reform for 6 years. I think they would like to have documentation of what just happened. Owen made a sound that was very close to a quiet laugh. Yes, Commander. Gordon was watching me from his station. When I looked at him, he gave me the small, deliberate nod that meant he understood exactly what I was doing and approved of it. Carla had already returned to her navigation display, tracking our heading with the steady, focused attention she always gave to the work in front of her. I sat back in my chair. The ironclad moved through the corridor, steady and unhurried, carrying its crew toward the far end of the Veyrath passage, leaving behind a patrol fleet that had just discovered something important about human ships and had not finished processing what it meant. We had not been aggressive. We had not been reckless. We had simply been what we were, a vessel built by people who understood that the universe is not interested in your intentions, only in your preparation. And we had been very, very well prepared. For days later, The Valaki sent 6 cruisers after us. Not the same 6. A different group, fresher, faster, with a harder edge to their formation pattern that told me someone higher than Dreth had made a decision. I was reviewing maintenance reports in my cabin when Owen's voice came through the intercom, quiet and direct the way he always is when something is happening. I was on the bridge in 40 seconds. The new formation was following us, not blocking us. That was different. That was a pursuit pattern, not an intercept. They had matched our speed and were holding position 800 kilometers behind us, which is close enough to make a point, but far enough to maintain deniability about what that point was. I looked at the sensor display for a moment. Then I looked at Owen. How long have they been following? 11 minutes. They came out of a holding position near the Sector 9 beacon. They were waiting. Someone had positioned them in advance. That meant this was not a response to our corridor transit. This was a prepared operation, which meant that data Burst Dreth had sent had reached someone who had already decided what to do before they heard what we had to say. I found that interesting. I pulled up the record of everything that had happened in the corridor, checked that all of it was still properly logged and encrypted, and then I looked at the formation behind us for another long moment. Gordon was at a station. He had been there for most of the night, I realized. I had not asked him to stay, and he would not have asked permission. How are we looking? I said. He understood what I meant. Primary power is at full output. Secondary cores are in standby, ready to spin up in 4 minutes. Tertiary is in passive mode, but functional. Hull integrity is nominal across all sections. If someone decided to do something we did not want them to do, we would know about it approximately 8 seconds before any standard boarding procedure could be initiated. And our countermeasures? He paused in the specific way he does when he is deciding how technically detailed to get. Our hull countermeasure system is not something most compact vessels are built to scan for. If someone tried to get sensors through our outer plating, they would need to already know exactly where to look and exactly what frequency to use. Do the Valaki know those things? Not from any data I have seen. Good. I'll look back at the pursuit formation. Owen, open a channel to the Compact Arbitration Bureau. Open. This is Commander Yaravas of the UES Ironclad. We're transmitting an updated incident log. Following our previous complaint regarding the Veyrath corridor intercept, we are now being followed by a 6-ship Valaki formation that established pursuit position without issuing any notification, citation, or communication of intent. Their formation began 11 minutes ago. We're transmitting full sensor records including their heading, speed, and power output. We request this be added to our open case file as a continuation of the same pattern of conduct. Ironclad out. Owen closed the channel. Ensign Carla Denon turned from her console. Commander, they are accelerating. Closing to 600 kilometers. Log it. Logged. The bridge was very quiet. Not the tense quiet of people who are afraid, but the particular quiet of people who are focused and have been in tight situations before and know that noise does not help. I was thinking about what the Valaki wanted. The first intercept in the corridor had been about engineering Standard 7 Theta, about the legal argument that our ships should not exist in their current form. But this pursuit pattern was something else. This was not a regulatory action. This was a pressure action. Someone wanted to see how we responded to sustained presence. They wanted to know if we would break routine, if we would change course, if we would show, in the behavior of the ship itself, some sign that we felt the pressure and were adjusting to it. I opened the ship-wide intercom. All crew, Commander Voss. We have a Valaki formation following us at 600 kilometers. They have not communicated any formal action, and we are under no legal obligation to alter our operations in any way. Maintain all current duty assignments. Crew rotation continues as scheduled. Dinner service in the main mess will begin on time. That is all. I clicked off and looked at Gordon. He was almost smiling. Dinner service, he said. People should eat, I said. He returned to his console. Owen spoke. Incoming transmission. It is from the pursuit formation. Not Admiral Dreth this time. Someone called Commander Rath Velith, Valaki's 2nd Division. Log it and play it. The voice was different from Dreth's. Younger, I thought, or at least less practiced at the particular kind of control Dreth had used. Commander Veleth said that the Valaki 2nd Division was conducting a lawful safety inspection of transit vessels in this sector under compact authority, and that the ironclad was requested to reduce speed and hold position for a standard inspection approach. He said standard inspection approach, like it was a phrase he had used many times and expected to work. I noted that he had used the word requested instead of ordered. That was different from Dreth. Either someone had coached him on phrasing, or he was personally less certain of his authority here than Dreth had been. I opened a return channel. Commander Veleth, this is Commander Voss. We have received your transmission, and it has been logged. I would ask you to send your inspection authority documentation, the specific compact code under which you are operating, and the case number linking this inspection to an open regulatory matter. We are happy to cooperate with any lawful inspection procedure. We simply need the documentation to make sure we're doing so correctly. I closed the channel. This was something I had learned from our legal officer 3 years ago during a different kind of dispute. When someone cannot produce their documentation, it is usually because the documentation does not quite say what they needed to say. Veleth's response came back in 6 minutes. That 6-minute gap was itself informative. He said the inspection authority was under Compact Safety Directive 12 Omega, which granted patrol formations the right to conduct vessel inspections in cases of suspected safety violations. I asked Owen to pull up Safety Directive 12 Omega. He pulled it up. He read it. He read it again. Commander, he said, Directive 12 Omega applies to vessels that have been specifically flagged for safety review by the Compact Safety Board following a formal complaint and a preliminary investigation finding. It does not apply to vessels operating in standard transit without a pending safety board case. Do we have a pending safety board case? He checked. No. So Directive 12 Omega does not apply to us. Correct. Log that analysis with a relevant statute text and timestamp. Attach it to the Open Bureau case file. Done. I opened the channel to Veleth again. Commander Veleth, I have reviewed Safety Directive 12 Omega. It does not apply to this vessel as we have no pending safety board case. I am noting this in our Bureau filing as a second instance of a compact statute being cited incorrectly in an attempt to compel compliance from a human vessel. If you have a different legal basis for this inspection, I would welcome you sending it through. Otherwise, we will continue on our current heading. I closed the channel. Carla had been watching the pursuit formation's movements on her display throughout all of this. They're still closing, she said. 500 kilometers now. What is their intercept point if they maintain current acceleration? At this rate, they would match our exact position in approximately 22 minutes. And our current heading puts us where? Approaching the edge of Sector 9. Beyond that is open space, no compact patrol designation, no corridor restrictions. I thought about that. 22 minutes to the sector edge. 22 minutes for Commander Veleth to either produce legitimate authority or close the distance to a point where something would have to happen. I made a decision. Gordon, Commander, bring the secondary power cores online. Not standby, active. He looked at me for just a moment, and in that moment, I saw him understand. Active, he confirmed and turned to his station. I want to be clear about something, because clarity matters here. Bringing the secondary cores online was not a weapon action. It was not a threat in the military sense of the word. What was precisely was a demonstration of capacity. The ironclad's power signature would change when the secondary cores came up. The Valaki sensors would detect it. They would see a ship that, instead of reducing power in response to pursuit, had just added more. It was the truth of what we were, expressed in the language of sensor data. Within 4 minutes of the secondary cores coming online, the Valaki formation's rate of closure slowed. Within 7 minutes, they had stopped closing entirely, holding at 480 kilometers. Owen checked something on his console. They're transmitting again. Another burst, military encryption. Longer this time. Log it. Logged. Carla was watching the distance readout with careful attention. They have matched our speed exactly, she said. They're no longer closing. What is our time to the sector edge? 19 minutes. I nodded. I thought about Admiral Dreth somewhere behind all of this, or perhaps someone above Dreth, sitting with a sensor read of the ironclad and trying to understand what they were looking at. A ship that had declined 2 separate stop orders. A ship whose hull had made a Valaki cutter move at the last moment. A ship that responded to pursuit not by slowing down or altering course, but by quietly bringing more power online, the way you might turn up the heat in a room when someone opens a window. They had been warned. Not in a boastful way, not in an aggressive way, but in the specific and practical way that humans warn each other, by telling the truth about what a thing is and what it was built to do. I looked at the sector edge on the display. 19 minutes. Owen, I said, Commander, compile everything from the last 4 days. Both incidents, all transmissions, all logs, the Bureau filings, the sensor records, the statute analyses, the unauthorized scans, the data bursts. Package it as a complete incident report. I want it ready to transmit in its entirety on my authorization. To whom this time? I looked at the sector edge on the display. To everyone who should know, I said, Fleet Command, the Compact Bureau, the Independent Shipping Consortium, the Surith Diplomatic Mission in Sector 4, since they have been pushing for patrol oversight reform, and the Compact Press Bureau, because a free press exists specifically for moments like this one. Owen held very still for a moment. That last one, he said carefully, is legally permitted under Compact Information Access Codes, I said, which you can look up and add to the package as a header document. He looked at me for a beat longer. Then he said, Yes, Commander, and started compiling. Gordon made that sound again, the one that was almost a laugh. 14 minutes later, we crossed the sector edge. The Valaki formation held the boundary line like it was a physical wall, stopping exactly at the edge of their patrol designation. There's 6 ships sitting in a clean row, watching us go. I watched them on the rear display until they were just points of light again. Then I looked forward. The Compact Arbitration Bureau contacted us directly on the morning of the 18th day. Not through a relay, not through Fleet Command. Directly, officer to officer, which is unusual enough that Owen double-checked the sender identification before he put it through to my console. The contact came from a senior arbitration officer named Helena Marsh, which told me immediately that this had risen above the standard administrative track. Senior arbitrators handle cases that have attracted enough attention to require a human face on the response. She was professional and careful, the way people are when they have read a very large file and formed opinions about it, and are trying to be neutral while also being honest. She said that the Bureau had received our full incident package, that it had been reviewed by 3 separate arbitration teams, and that the case had been flagged for priority processing. She said priority processing the way you say a phrase that usually means something mundane, but in this instance meant the opposite. I asked her what that meant in practical terms. She told me that the Bureau had also received, simultaneously with our filings, a set of counter-filings from the Valaki diplomatic mission. Those filings characterized the ironclad's behavior as provocative, described our corridor transit as an act of deliberate physical intimidation, and cited our secondary power activation during the pursuit incident as an escalatory action. I listened to all of that without comment. Then I asked Helena Marsh a very simple question. I asked whether the Valaki filings had included any documentation showing that we had deviated from our filed flight plan, exceeded any approved power parameter, raised any defensive or offensive system, or failed to comply with any correctly cited compact statute. There was a pause on her end. A short one, but I noticed it. She said that the Valaki filings had not included such documentation. I said I was not surprised because no such documentation existed. She paused again. Then she said that the Bureau was requesting a full briefing from both parties and that she was contacting me first as a courtesy, since our documentation had been more complete and our filing timestamps were earlier. I thanked her and asked her to confirm one specific detail. I asked whether our log showed that we had never raised our defensive screen during either incident. She confirmed that based on the sensor data we had transmitted, our shield systems had remained entirely offline throughout both encounters. I asked her to make a note of that in the case record. She said she would. After the transmission ended, I sat for a moment in my chair and looked at the display, which showed nothing but open space ahead and the routine data feeds that run constantly on any functioning ship. Owen came to stand near my console. He had the look of someone who has been patient for a long time and is now watching the patience pay off, though he would never say that out loud. They're going to lose this case, he said. Yes, I said. Admiral Dreth is probably already facing questions. Probably. and the unauthorized scans and the illegal obstruction and the false statute citation and the data burst transmissions. All of it is documented and time-stamped and has been sitting in the bureau file for 11 days. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. You planned for all of this from the beginning. I thought about how to answer that. I planned for the possibility that they would do what they did, I said. I did not know they would do exactly this. But I knew that if they acted outside their authority, the most important thing was to make sure everything was documented completely, filed correctly, and transmitted to the right people before anyone could stop us. And now they cannot stop it. No, he nodded slowly. What happens next? I looked at the open space ahead. The Bureau will hold their briefings. The Valaki diplomatic mission will try to reframe what happened. The Independent Shipping Consortium will use our documentation to support the reform filing they have had pending for 6 years. The Surith mission will ask for copies because they have been wanting leverage in the patrol oversight negotiations. And somewhere in the compact, a committee will start asking why a human vessel was intercepted twice, under false legal authority, by a patrol formation whose commanding admiral has now been recalled for conduct review. And the story gets told. Owens said. The truth gets told, I said, which is slightly different. He thought about that. What is the difference? I looked at the display again. A story can be shaped. The truth just sits there and waits for people to look at it directly. Gordon had been listening from his station. He spoke without turning around. The Valaki are going to ask for the ironclad's full engineering specifications as part of the inquiry. Officially, yes, I said, they are, and we are going to provide them. Every last weld and backup circuit, I said, with documentation. Gordon was quiet for a moment. They're not going to like what they see. No, but they're going to understand it. I paused. Eventually, he turned then, just slightly, to look at me over his shoulder. You think that matters? Whether they understand. I thought about that question seriously, because it deserved a serious answer. Yes, I said, because the worst version of this, the version I most want to avoid, is one where the Valaki look at our ships and decide that the size and the power and the extra layers are preparation for something threatening. Where they decide that we build the way we build because we are planning something. And the truth is we build the way we build because of the Steadfast, Gordon said quietly. The Steadfast, and the Harmon Station evacuation, and the Kareth system incident. And every time before those, going back before formal records were kept, when our people built something that was not quite strong enough and paid for that choice. The bridge was quiet for a moment. Not the tense quiet of an emergency, but the different kind of quiet that comes when people are thinking about something real. Carla spoke from her console, her voice thoughtful. When I was at the academy, one of my instructors said that human engineering culture is unique because we build our lessons into our machines. Most species learn from failure and then change their procedures. We change our procedures and then also change the physical object itself. I looked at her. Your instructor was right. He also said the Valaki had a hard time understanding it because their engineering philosophy is based on efficiency. Minimum resource for maximum output. They do not build in the extra unless they can quantify the exact threat that makes it necessary. And we cannot always quantify it. Owens said. No, I said. Sometimes we cannot. Sometimes we just know that the last time we did not have it, people did not come home. And that is enough. Carla turned back to her console, nodding slightly, the way she does when something has settled into place for her. I looked at the space ahead. The Compact Arbitration Bureau inquiry would take time. These things always did. The diplomatic channels would be busy for weeks, maybe months. The Valaki would file and refile and try different angles of argument because they were methodical in their way and they did not give up ground easily. The reform debates would sharpen. New voices would enter them, armed with our documentation. None of that was quick. None of it was simple, but it was moving. Owen checked his console. Commander, I have a follow-up message from Helena Marsh. She is asking whether we would be willing to provide a brief prepared statement for the Bureau's public record of the case. I thought about that for a moment. Yes, I said. Tell her we would be willing. And ask her to confirm that the statement will be included in the case record in full, unedited. I will ask, he said. I started thinking about what I want to say. Not for the Bureau, exactly. Not for the Valaki diplomatic mission or the reform advocates or the press bureau. For the record. For anyone years from now who pulled up this case and wanted to understand what had happened in the Veyrath corridor. I wanted them to understand that we had not been aggressive, that we had not looked for a confrontation or tried to create one, that every step we had taken had been measured and documented and grounded in the law. And I wanted them to understand why the ship that had done all of that was built the way it was built. Not because we were afraid, not because we were planning something, but because we had been out here long enough to know that space is indifferent to good intentions, and the only honest response to indifference is preparation. We built our ships thick and heavy and redundant because we had learned what happens when you build them light and fast and assume the worst will not come. It comes. It always comes eventually. And when it does, the difference between a ship that brings its crew home and a ship that does not is measured in layers of plating and backup circuits, and the quiet belief that every person on board is worth the extra weight. The Velaki had called us over-engineered. They had meant it as a criticism. We had listened to the criticism, noted it in the record, and continued on our heading. Because that is what you do when someone questions the lessons your people learn in blood. You do not argue. You do not get angry. You let the ship speak for itself. The formal Bureau inquiry convened 17 days after our initial corridor transit. I attended via secure relay from the Ironclad, which had completed its scheduled delivery run and was now holding in a transit berth 2 sectors away from the proceedings. Helena Marsh chaired the inquiry panel. 3 other senior arbitrators sat with her. 1 Surith, 1 from the neutral Tevan delegation, and 1 human, a retired fleet admiral named Caroline Webb who had been in compact legal proceedings for 2 decades. I had known her name for years. Her reputation was for patience and precision and an absolute refusal to let technical details get simplified away from the record. I was glad she was there. The inquiry lasted 3 days. I will not describe every hour of it, because most of the important work had already been done before the first session began. Our documentation was complete. The timestamps were unimpeachable. The statute analyses Owen had prepared were accurate and had been verified by 2 independent compact legal offices before the inquiry opened. What the inquiry added was the other side. The Velaki diplomatic mission sent their own representative, a senior official named Trevith Sorn, who was skilled and careful and had clearly spent a great deal of time preparing. He led with the argument that our ship's configuration was itself a form of provocation, that arriving in a shared corridor in a vessel that visibly exceeded compact engineering standards sent a signal that was, regardless of intent, aggressive in nature. Helena Marsh asked him to define aggressive in nature under compact law. He gave a definition that was thoughtful and which, if you accepted its premises, was internally consistent. The problem was that accepting those premises required accepting that a ship's physical characteristics could constitute a legal violation independent of any action taken by that ship. That a vessel could be guilty of something simply by existing in a certain configuration. Admiral Webb asked a very quiet question. She asked whether the Velaki definition of aggressive configuration had ever been applied to Velaki military vessels operating in shared corridors, since those vessels also exceeded civilian engineering standards in multiple categories. Trevith Sorn said that was not equivalent because Velaki military vessels operated under compact patrol authority. Admiral Webb said she understood that and asked him to point to the specific compact statute that created different engineering standards for patrol vessels versus other registered ships. He pointed to a statute. She read it on the record. It did not say what he had implied it said. That was the moment I knew how the inquiry would end. Not because of that single exchange, but because the pattern was clear. Every legal argument the Velaki mission offered ran into the same problem. The documentation we had filed showed exactly what had happened, in sequence with timestamps, and what had happened did not support the characterization they needed to sustain their position. On the second day, the inquiry focused on our secondary power activation during the pursuit incident. This was the argument I had expected to be the strongest one against us, because it was the action most easily described out of context as escalatory. I gave a prepared statement. I said that the Ironclad's secondary power cores have been brought to active status during the pursuit incident as a routine readiness measure in response to an undefined close formation approach by vessels that had not identified a legal basis for their presence. I said that the secondary cores had not been connected to any weapons system or any defensive screen. I said that their activation had increased our power output to a level still within our filed operational parameters. I then said something that I'd thought about carefully before I said it. I said that I understood why the Velaki might find the power activation alarming, because from the outside, a human ship bringing more power online looks like preparation for confrontation. I said I wanted to be honest about what it actually was. It was preparation, not for confrontation, but for the same reason every backup system on the Ironclad existed, because our people have learned not to be caught unprepared, and that lesson is not stored only in our procedures and manuals, but also in the physical design of our ships and in the habits of the people who serve on them. I said we did not power up because we were going to do something. We powered up because we do not wait to see if we need to. The inquiry room was quiet for a moment after I said that. Helena Marsh asked me if I wanted to add anything. I said there was one more thing. I asked that the record include the fact that throughout both incidents, the Ironclad shield systems had remained offline, that we had powered nothing that was designed to harm anyone, that the only systems we had activated were the ones that kept our own people safe. She said it would be in the record. On the third day, the panel deliberated for 4 hours and issued a preliminary ruling. The ruling found that the Verath corridor intercept had not been conducted under valid compact authority, that the statute cited by Admiral Dreth did not support the stop order as issued, and that the obstruction of our transit path constituted a violation of Compact Navigation Code Section 14. It further found that the subsequent pursuit incident had been initiated without valid legal foundation, and that the characterization of our secondary power activation as escalatory was not supported by the evidence. The ruling also noted, without ruling on the broader question, that the Ironclad's engineering configuration had been the subject of an ongoing compact review for 11 years, and that the incident had highlighted the need for that review to be resolved. Admiral Webb added a written note to the record. I read it 3 times. She wrote that the most striking element of the incident, in her view, was not the legal question, but the operational one. She wrote that a human vessel had been intercepted, pursued, and subjected to what she characterized as an implied physical threat, and had responded at every step with documentation, legal citation, and continued adherence to its filed plan. She wrote that the Ironclad's crew had demonstrated a form of discipline that was, in her experience, rarely seen in any species' military or commercial operations. She wrote that discipline had protected them more completely than any weapon would have. When Owen read it to me from his console, he read it straight through without stopping, which is not how he usually reads things. When he finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "She got it right." I thought about Admiral Dreth in his command chair, watching the Ironclad pass through his formation. I thought about Commander Veleth holding the sector boundary, watching us cross it. I thought about the data burst transmissions they had sent out, those encrypted signals that had traveled faster than we had, carrying their side of the story to someone who had made decisions based on them. And I thought about the moment, 11 days after the corridor transit, when our full documentation package had arrived at the Compact Press Bureau. That moment was now history. The questions it had generated were already circulating in news feeds and diplomatic channels, and I had heard in at least 3 separate Compact committee meetings that had nothing formally to do with the Ironclad, but which had found the documentation very useful for other conversations they were already having. The truth had sat there and waited, and now people were looking at it directly. I was in my cabin when the final ruling came through. It was complete and detailed and added several clarifications to the preliminary finding, including a formal citation against the Velaki Patrol Division for the signal suppression during the corridor transit, which had been discovered by a neutral relay station and added to the bureau case file by someone I had never met who had simply done their job correctly. I read the ruling once and then set it on my desk. Gordon knocked on my cabin door and came in without waiting, which he only does when something is worth coming in for. He sat down across from me in the single chair that I keep for visitors and folded his hands on his knee and looked at me. "It is done," he said. "The preliminary phase," I said. "The broader review of Standard 7 Theta will take longer. But the corridor case is resolved." "Yes." He nodded. He was quiet for a moment, looking at the desk, at the tablet with the ruling on it. "I've been thinking about something," he said. "Tell me." They thought we were arrogant. The Valaki. In those first transmissions, I could hear it. They thought we refused to stop because we thought we were better than them, that we felt entitled to pass through without obeying the rules. I know, but that was not why. No, I said. It was not. He looked up at me. We kept going because the rules did not require us to stop. Because stopping would have been a concession to authority that was not actually there. Because if we had stopped, the stopping itself would have become the precedent, and the next human ship through that corridor would have been stopped too, under the same false authority and the one after that. Yes, we kept going because it was correct to keep going. Yes. He was quiet again for a moment. Then he said, I think that is the part they are going to have the hardest time understanding. Not the hull plating, not the backup reactors. The fact that we kept going not out of strength, but out of accuracy. Because our assessment of the situation told us that stopping was wrong, and we trusted that assessment, even when 6 cruisers were telling us we should think differently. I looked at him. Gordon did not speak a great deal, and when he did, it was usually worth listening to carefully. You think that is unique to us? I said, I think it might be, he said. Most species, when faced with that kind of pressure, recalculate based on the social or physical force being applied, not just on whether they are legally or factually in the right. The pressure itself becomes part of the equation. And for us, he considered it. For us, if the assessment is sound, the pressure is just weather. You dress for weather. You do not change your destination because of it. I thought about the 9 people who had not survived the 6 days after the Steadfast went dark. I thought about the families who had waited and the debrief reports I had read as a young officer, trying to understand what had gone wrong and how to make sure it did not go wrong again. I thought about every lesson that was now written into the ironclad's hull and systems and the quiet habits of its crew. Whether Gordon had called the pressure. You dress for it. We have been dressing for it for a very long time. The engineering review will go our way, I said. Eventually, the documentation we have built, combined with the corridor case, gives the reform advocates enough material to push Standard 7 Theta back for a comprehensive update. It will take years. But it will move, he said. It will move. He stood up. He was at the door before he stopped and turned back. Commander, one more thing. Go ahead. When this is all done, the review, the reform, whatever comes next, the Valaki are going to know our specifications. They asked for them during the inquiry, and we provided them. They know what our hull is rated for now. They know about the backup reactors and the redundant systems. Yes. Does that concern you? I thought about it honestly. No, I said finally. Because what those specifications actually tell them is not what they thought they were going to find. They thought they would find threat capacity, weapon systems hidden behind civilian designations, offensive power disguised as safety redundancy. And instead, they found exactly what we told them they would find. Extra layers of plating over crew quarters. Backup power systems designed to keep life support running when primary fails. Hull tolerances built for the worst case instead of the expected case. I looked at the tablet with the ruling on it. When they read those specifications with that understanding, they're going to see something they did not expect. They're going to see a species that built its fear into its engineering instead of hiding it. That said, in the language of steel and circuit, we know what it costs to be unprepared, and we are not willing to pay that cost again. Gordon was still in the doorway, listening. That is not threatening, I said. It is honest. And honest is usually a better foundation than threatening for a relationship that is going to last a long time. He looked at me for a moment. Then he nodded once, the small and deliberate nod that meant he had found the thing he was looking for, and he walked back to his station. I sat alone in my cabin for a while after that. Outside, the ironclad sat in its transit berth, quiet and heavy and ready, its 3 backup reactors in standby mode, its hull plating exactly as thick as it needed to be, carrying the lessons of every ship that had come before it in the weight of its own construction. We had been warned a long time ago that the universe was not going to make accommodations for us. We had listened. We had built accordingly. And when the universe sent 6 cruisers to test whether we had been paying attention, we had shown them the answer in the most honest way possible. Not with weapons, not with threats, with a ship that kept moving, a log that kept running, and a crew that knew exactly what they were doing and why. The Valaki had been warned too before this started, warned that our vessels were different, that they did not behave the way other ships behaved, that the measurements did not mean what the measurements usually meant. They had not believed it then. I was reasonably confident they believed it now. I picked up the final ruling one more time and read the last line of Admiral Webb's note. She had written that she hoped the incident would serve not as a point of conflict between humanity and the Valaki, but as the beginning of a more honest conversation between two species who had, perhaps, more in common than either had yet recognized, because both of them, in their own ways, were trying very hard not to be caught unprepared again. I thought that was probably true. I set the ruling down, turned off the desk light, and went to get some sleep. The ironclad would be ready when I woke up. It always was.